Welcome to the Together 2021 Disability History Month Festival's International Film Festival, taking place for the 10th time. I can hardly believe it myself. We were a one-off film festival for 2012, and as with the rest of the Together 2021 festival, here we are in our 10th edition and our second edition online. So I'm really delighted to welcome people. It is a lunchtime discussion, so do enjoy your lunch at the same time. I'd like to start with a few thank yous to Film London, Arts Council England and the National Lottery Community Fund for supporting the film festival, and to our access workers, Chris from Burroughs Interpreting and Laura from Global Real-Time Captioning. Global Real-Time Captioning produce all of the live captions for us, and we can thoroughly recommend them. Chris is a very popular interpreter with Together, and we're delighted to see her back from her maternity leave to be translating for us at so many important events this year. Next, I'm delighted to welcome Paula Lamont from Beck2. And Paula, if you want to switch your camera on, and Emily, if you put the spotlight on Paula, I think we'll come to Paula for some introductions next. Oh, you just need your microphone off mute, Paula.
Rookie error. Thank you very much for inviting me to speak today. My name is Paula Lamont. I am Assistant National Secretary at Beck2, which is a sector of the Prospect Trade Union. Probably doesn't mean a lot to you all in terms of my job title, but essentially I head up the biggest division for film and television workers in Beck2, in the Beck2 sector. I also, just to add, in terms of my work previous to working for the union, I was a location manager. I started as a runner in my late teens and worked my way up to head of department. So I've worked my entire life in the film industry, and now I work for the trade union that represents film and television workers.
Brilliant. Now, if you'd like to join in the discussion with your camera and microphone on, and you haven't come in as a panelist, just post something in the chat. And while I'm moving on with a bit more of an introduction, Emily, my assistant, will move you over to becoming a panelist so that you can join in with the discussion. But in the meantime, I'm just going to set the scene a little bit and come back to Paula for some initial thoughts before we open it out. So let's start with public funding for filmmaking from lottery players and taxpayers, which is administered largely via the British Film Institute, the BFI. So this is where we would expect deaf and disabled people, who make up 20% of the working age population, to benefit the most. That's where, because obviously there's all sorts of other issues when private funding comes in. So in 2019-2020, which is the last year we have figures available, the BFI funded no deaf and disabled filmmakers' productions at all. The previous year, just 2% of its production funding went to deaf and disabled people. In 2019-20, only 1% of the BFI's development funding went to deaf and disabled filmmakers, and that was compared to 3% the previous year, so that's actually a drop. Now, in terms of debut directors, which are first-time filmmakers, emerging filmmakers, no funding at all went to deaf and disabled people in either year. The only funding that was allocated to deaf and disabled people from the BFI was via the DocSoc strand, which is basically documentaries about society. And that's where disabled and deaf people are traditionally placed as the subject matter and the object of public gaze. 14% of this funding went to deaf and disabled people in 2019-20 compared to 5% the previous year. So the BFI clearly has just one box to place deaf and disabled people in. Many filmmakers, of course, self fund their work and particularly their first films, but deaf and disabled people are far less likely to have access to this level of resourcing, including being far less likely to be able to work a second job and far less likely to have access to credit. Another huge barrier is support at work. Many filmmakers work without pay to achieve their dream, hoping to recoup at least some of the costs from distribution. But the UK's Access to Work scheme won't pay for support workers, interpreters, travel costs, and special equipment unless your annual income has already reached a taxable level. If you're starting out, life is even more difficult. There's no funding whatsoever for access support for interns and unpaid trainees, even though this is the traditional path to gaining experience. So, finally, before I ask Paula to speak and then open it up for discussion, I'd like to invite you all to think about what could be done practically to break down these barriers. What could be done to shake up the BFI funding system, for example, to remove the unconscious bias that places us firmly into the documentary sector? How can we ensure that people with lived experience are judging proposals and CVs? Could employment and training quotas rather than targets be introduced for all publicly funded film projects, including production companies who benefit from tax breaks? And what about the long hours, short breaks culture that disadvantages parents, carers, and older workers, as well as deaf and disabled people? And all of this was before COVID made infection control and health and safety an issue too. So we've got lots of barriers to discuss, but what we really want to talk about is how to break them down. So I'm just absolutely delighted that Paula, with all of her experience, both within the industry and within the union, is able to join us. And Paula, what do you think?
Thank you, Ju. So there's some really sobering statistics that have come through there in regards to funding and access to the industry. And I think the one that stood out for me the most was no debut directors funding at all went to deaf and disabled people in either year that you referred to. And my initial response to that, I guess my emotional reaction to that is what a great shame for our UK creative industries, which are now missing out as a result of that, missing out on some fantastic talent. And I like to go on initially with Ju's last point regarding working terms and conditions that we have in the film and TV industry. Long hours, grueling schedules are the norm, and reducing unsociable hours is an issue which is a top priority for our members, particularly, and as a union as a whole. These working conditions are a barrier for equal access to our industry. They prohibit well-being, deny access for those with caring roles, and damage family life and life-work balance. And so my point is by addressing the industrial issues facing deaf and disabled people is in everyone's interest. Many of the problems we identify with the impact deaf and disabled people and improvements our members campaign for have an impact on everyone in the industry. There's no them and us. It's about improving the human experience of the workplace, and that could be a set, an office, a location, and within our crews and departments. And we need a diverse and vibrant industry that truly reflects the society we create entertainment for. And for that to happen, we need those in the industry to bring with them a range of life experiences. And so whilst we can lobby for more inclusion, we must have in place a financial incentive to push for better access and opportunities for deaf and disabled crew. Now, what I hear from our deaf and disabled members is they're having difficulties not only accessing opportunities with recruitment processes not accommodating their needs, but also once they're in post, reasonable adjustments are just not forthcoming. And managers, funders, people in the film industry in positions of power lack the experience, training, and knowledge of pretty standard HR practices that are routine in most workplaces. and they're often not aware of their legal obligations under the Equality Act 2010. And that's as a union, we do quite a lot of work supporting people that we feel have been discriminated with, discriminated in workplace and accessing opportunities. So that we do a lot of work with our legal team who support some of our deaf and disabled members. And what I also hear is that our deaf and disabled members want an honest and open conversation about the support that they need, so they can deliver to their best, and the assumptions aren't made about what they can and cannot do, which is really common. And it's surprising, given how simple this request seems, how rare it actually happens. I mean, at Bectu, we're going through a learning process ourselves about how we make the union an open organisation for deaf and disabled people. And that, I have to say, has led to some robust criticisms in some areas. But I really hope that our members feel confident to point things out to us and help us on that learning journey. And finally, I wanted, and I'll pop the link into the chat, but I want to highlight some of the work that is being done by our unscripted branch, which is a relatively new branch in the union, having just sprung up in the last 18 months or so. And in their work in collaboration with deaf and disabled people in TV, and they've launched the Disability by Design campaign, which you can see on our social media channels and on our website. And some of the testimonials from the campaign highlight how important it is that we tackle these issues with some urgency. The key aim of the campaign is to amplify the voices of deaf and disabled professionals, showcase the breadth of disabled talent, really, really important, in the UK TV and film industry, and educate both employers and employees, the people that we work with, on legal obligations and best and worst practice. So thanks again for having me, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have. I'll put the link to that campaign in the chat.
Yes, that's great. It sounds like a fantastic campaign. So if you'd like to join in the conversation with your camera and microphone on and you're a panelist, switch on now, or if you find you can't, it may be, Emily, that you just need to give people that kind of cue to switch on. If you're an attendee and you would like to join in, just pop something in the chat. We will switch you over to panelist and then you will be able to join in. While that's happening, I mean, do you think standards have actually been going down? I mean, filmmaking is an international industry, and so much of the conversation around what happened on the Rust set has been about, things are becoming even more low budget, even more long hours, even more short breaks, rushing, duplicating jobs. I mean, is that something we're generally seeing in the UK?
It's so there has been additional difficulties put in place by COVID protocols, which has made and I think speaking to some members, they've turned around and said, look, it's just become a lot less fun working on set because of these measures. It means that budgets are stretched further, but also the demand that came out of the pandemic for film and TV, where you remember we had several months up to a year where production was essentially halted. There seems to be quite a panic to make more material, particularly for streaming, where everyone's watched what's already available, and so it's the busiest that we have ever seen the industry currently, and that means that people have stepped up through their roles into management roles much more quickly. It also means there's additional pressure on funding, and money is expected to go further. So smaller productions where you need to put measures in place for COVID protocols, it means that costs money. So they're not getting any more funding in order to do that. It's expected to be taken out the pot, which would have previously gone further. So it certainly is a more pressurized industry. I think outside of COVID, the volume now that is being made in terms of film and television is significantly increasing, meaning again the skills shortage and the experience of people has an impact on how well managed shoots and productions and films are.
Yes, and sadly, that all makes a lot of sense. I mean, we've been in touch with young disabled filmmakers who've really worked and worked and worked and got their first degree and got their second degree and made their student films, and then have said since COVID, well, actually, I'm not going to go into film. It's just not possible. Before COVID, we had young people in contact with us. Well, I've done my degree, I've done all my training, I've got a work placement, but there's no support. There's nobody to drive me there. I've got no access to support. So instead of taking up this lovely training place on this wonderful film, I'm just stuck at home. I'm delighted to see Mark and Maria join us. Mark, would you like to introduce yourself first? And yes, tell us what you think about the issues.
Hi, I'm Mark. I did my degree and masters in television and film quite a few years ago, and I found it, first of all, just listening to the stats, that was insane. I personally didn't know that was how it was. I found my first film placement by myself, which was by going to a Q&A. But one of the things that I did have to fight with was that a lot of the help was provided by myself. I had to take a helper of my own. Because I just finished university, thankfully, I had a very, very small amount of student money left, which allowed me to pay for my own transport, including things like taxis to and from set, because that just wasn't, I couldn't physically get on, like the bus, for example, that they'd put on. I've done 3 films in all, and every one of them was the same. Now, I helped out with the camera department, so I was on set. I'll give you just a very quick example. One of the things were filmed in a bank. It was 12 flights of stairs, so there was no one to help. So my helper had to carry my wheelchair to the 12 flights of stairs, and I had to shuffle all the way up the top just so I could be involved in the shoot at the top. That's pretty much where it. And then I broke my hip, and it's been very difficult a few years ago, very difficult to get back in, simply because there seems to be a lot of because of, not just because of COVID, but that hasn't helped. It's become a lot more difficult for people to understand that you'll need a little bit more help than you even did before COVID. Just like you say, with things like health and safety, the infection control, all of that sort of stuff. And hence why I'm here. I wanted to have a sort of a shoe in, if you like, have a listen and see what sort of things can be done.
Well, I think it seems to me that we need to keep listening to you, Mark. But what I would like to pick up from that is that there's actually a large number of very well qualified emerging disabled filmmakers, or who would be emerging if they were allowed to emerge. This idea that, oh, well, deaf and disabled people, they just don't have any access to the industry. Well, more and more now people are coming in through universities and they do have access. And over the years at the festival, we worked with quite a number and also screened first films. So it's just, to me, completely unforgivable that debut director's money is not including deaf and disabled people. And it is something we will continue to be taking up with our usual rigour, which is not much appreciated, it has to be said, by the BFI. But we're talking about public money. I mean, what would actually be ideal for you? Let's turn it round. What do we need?
Well, personally, it would be great if there was for me anyway, especially with, first of all, as well, I'm in a wheelchair, which if you didn't gather from before, that's sort of one of my main issues, is I'm wheelchair bound. So things like having even an on-set coordinator that's solely for the purpose of trying to aid and assist people with disabilities. Things like the logistics of getting to a location, or filming on 12 floors in a bank. That was something that if there was, I feel, some sort of coordinator that was able to either discuss what could be done or give an option, that would be helpful. Things like a runner as well. Like, obviously there's runners all the time. Sometimes you don't have to be highly qualified just to have someone to assist you. So even just having someone that's there that can, pass you something that you couldn't reach, or help you get over a couple of wires from lights or whatever, just having the ability to have access to someone that's on set, you don't feel guilty for having to ask. That's another thing, because you do feel there's a lot of guilt involved. I find anyway. Everyone's very busy, and you don't want to ask someone to say, "Oh, can you just give me a hand?" Because they've got their own jobs to do. You don't want to be a burden on set. You want to be able to be part of it and help. I think if there was something there in place, I think that would be a massive, massive help.
So, this is all brainstorming, but I think that's what we're here to do. I mean, do you think a sort of joint internship where you've almost got a buddy system?
That would be
I'm
great.
not keen on buddy systems usually, but in this case, I think, there's so many young people after internships on film sets that if you're bringing people in pairs to support each other, because there's loads of support the disabled person can give the other intern, but it's having that sort of practical support, isn't it? I hate to say it, but it's actually something they've been trialling in a local school, whereas instead of young people being forced to stick with some teaching assistant all the time, somebody else in their class gets special privileges to use the lifts, and then they carry bags and things and open lift doors and just travel around. It doesn't cost anything to buddy up the interns. But I think this issue around taxes, we need some central funding. We really, really do. And something I'm not sure if I made clear, but a lot of film production companies get tax breaks. It isn't just the sort of minority who are getting BFI funding. If you're getting a tax break, what are you offering to taxpayers in return? Did you want to come in again on this, Paula, because you're so experienced on set?
I think it was going back. Just like to sort of talk about how, the pressure of the industry. So what we're also hearing, going back to what we were previously talking about, is the expectation of being able to change schedules, locations, scenes for a particular day. There seems to be at the moment a kind of top heavy approach to who makes the decisions about how what the lead up time is in terms of those mind changing sort of decisions that are made, and it's actually puts pressure on everybody, and it makes if we do have deaf and disabled people on set, obviously that makes their lives more difficult, but it makes everyone's life more difficult. And I think we need a top-down approach where we have producers particularly that are willing to say to a headstrong director that actually that you can't just decide that you want this small thing to change because of the knock-on effect that has on the rest of the crew. Because the more time we have to plan, the more accessible we can make our productions. It's the last minute changes that just are kind of really breaking people at the minute in terms of being able to adapt and change. And I hear all the time from employers, particularly, they say that, oh, we're a creative industry and therefore we can't be bound by time constraints and sort of rock solid schedules. But the thing is when you lock those things down, you enable creativity. So when people know the hours they're going to work, they know when they're going home, they know they're able to get enough rest, they know what's expected of the next day and the following days. It means that they can unlock that creativity more effectively. And also, talking about having more deaf and disabled people on set, I'm always awestruck by some of our members that are deaf and disabled when they tell me how they've adapted to working on set. It's amazing. They say, well, I have this app that does this and I can do that this way, and they might job share, like you were saying, buddying systems, job sharing with somebody so that they can bring their experience in collaboration with somebody else. And it's just it's remarkable, really. So deaf and disabled people are often the most creative problem solvers that we have access to in the industry, because they, you know, they're sort of forced to be, in a way. So I think, you know, it is, like, going back to my original very first point, it's really sad that actually we're not facilitating and finding the money and the funding to ensure that these amazingly creative people are actually getting equal access. Because, you know, equality, it isn't a privilege, it should be an essential, it should be a necessity of, you know, and it's basic human rights that people should have equal access to work and you know, work-life balance and things like that. So yeah, that's all I wanted to add, really.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. Together 2012, who organises the festival, we're based on Article 30 of the UN Convention of the Rights of Disabled People, and that gives us the right to access the arts on equal terms as artists, as arts workers, as audience members, and to be resourced to celebrate and to deliver our own cultural activities. So there's quite a gap there, isn't there, in the BFI funding? I mean, what Paul has talked about, I think, has been two things. And one is the human right as a deaf and disabled person to have access to work, but also the contribution that deaf and disabled people can make. Now, I've always been very wary of the kind of creative case for diversity, because if you've got to make a case, you've pretty much lost it. And it isn't, to me, about equality. It isn't about diversity to me, it's about inclusion. But I think the other things that are ignored is Mark, for example, uses a support worker, so he's already used to managing staff. You know, he's used to logistics because he's got to plan everything he does much more carefully. So the moment that you take in a deaf and disabled intern, they're actually at a higher level than the person who's going to be buddying them and picking things up for them. You know, that buddy could learn an awful lot. You know, how many young people are coming into the film and television industry who've already got management experience? But every deaf and disabled student who's had support through university has already got that management experience. They've already got that scheduling experience. They've already got that logistics experience. You know, it's not just diversity. Now, I'm delighted to see that Maria's been able to join us again. So I'm going to bring you into the conversation next, Maria.
No worries.
And I should say, apologies, I completely forgot to audio describe myself at the beginning, so I'm just going to do that really briefly and ask other people to do that next time they come into the conversation. So I'm a white woman with pale olive skin. I've got green eyes behind black plastic glasses. I've got a self-styled hennaed corona crop under a black leather cap. And I've got a black, pink and white Edinburgh Film Festival t-shirt from 2017, which partly reminds me that the Scottish film festivals are actually much more inclusive than the English ones. So, Maria, if you could just give a really brief description.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm a white, 5-foot female with long dark hair. I've got glasses, myself plastic, and I'm wearing a brown woolly jumper, and I'm in Scotland. And I am... So I have a Scottish accent, but I'm actually Italian in origin. So lovely to meet everyone. So I'm here to just to say hi to everyone. And what Paula says, I'm part of Deaf and Disabled People in TV. So it's an amazing organisation. And the person that runs that, Caroline O'Neill, is fantastic. She is deaf herself, and she is just absolutely fantastic. I would urge anyone who is deaf and disabled in the TV industry, please join us. We are a community of love and support, and it's so important. There's also Dank as well. Not going to not say anything about Dank, and I just want to say thank you for bringing me on as a panelist. This is such an important discussion. Because like you said, and like Paula said, and what Matt says, we are undervalued. And it's so sad that we are. And we shouldn't be undervalued because we are really special. I mean, we're more special than people think we are. And I'm proud to be disabled. I can't help it. And I champion my disability. And we have a disability network group on Bet2 that's run by Diane Lockwood. I think that's her name, and I'm part of that network. So there is support out there. And to be honest with you, there has been challenges, and I've had to self-fund all my films, and I work for Sky as well for 16 years on the phones in a non-production role. But I also then do film on the side and TV on the side, and it's been tough. I'm not going to lie and tell you it hasn't been tough, because that's going to be a complete lie. I faced discrimination that I shouldn't have faced, but I've been so lucky because there's also amazing organisations like Screen Skills that are stepping up. There's Film 104 that I got on Step Up to Supervisor course, and I was like, why me? And I was like, sure, why me? And I was like, why? And I was like, well, I don't deserve this. But I'm thinking, wait a minute, I do. Why am I doubting myself? And I think as women, we doubt ourselves. So I started off as a short filmmaker. So I started back in 2010 as a short filmmaker, and I thought, okay, baptism for fire. If you want to learn how to make film, do short filmmaking. It's like you'll learn to do everything, and you'll learn to be like. I became a producer, and I thought, why on earth do I want to be a producer? That's like the most headache thing. But I had the most amazing crew behind me, and they've worked with me for a long time. But here in Glasgow, that's where I'm from, we've got the Glasgow Film Crew. So out there is your own network. So networking with other people. And you can make your own films with an iPad and iPhone right now. And I think it's like really, really disgraceful that there's not enough funding for people with deaf and disabled to make films. They should be. We shouldn't, like you said. I don't want to make documentaries. I love documentaries, don't get me wrong, but last year I won a place on my stop motion animation, won a place last year on the high end budget animation clinic series, and during lockdown I made a stop motion. I've never made stop motion before, so I've done a 4-week course, and so I decided to do my first stop motion animation, and I won a place. And I got mentored by 4 weeks, like for the people. Like my mentor was the person that did Bob the Builder and things like that. And I'm like, why am I getting mentored? And I was like, and now I'm on a Screen Skills 2021 mentorship, and Caroline White is my mentor. She has 97 credits, amazing. And she is giving me the confidence I didn't have. And now I've realised that I love developing children's content, and that's my path, and that's what I'm going to do. And then I'm now going to be moving on to a new company in the future, in the next couple of months, because I've also got long COVID, and people forget disability is a full-time job. And having a disability affects us all differently. And doesn't matter what you've got, we all are different. And I just want people just to communicate at the start when we go for a job. How can I best support you? How is it easier that we work together, and just make it easy to disclose, because we have to disclose for insurance purposes. It's really important that we disclose, and and to stop making people the fear of hiring people with disabilities, and stop that fear. And when I had a conversation with Bet2 Vision the start of this year, and I said to Bet2 Vision, yeah, can we do disability awareness courses in Scotland for Scottish freelancers? Can we do neurodivergent awareness courses? And we have them right now. We've got them in Scotland, and I'm like, okay. And it's about, and then at Sky, I'm now a Sky autism champion, because I went to Sky and I was like, okay, they were talking about like what the remit for 2025, and I was like, okay, Sky, what are you doing for disability? Where's your disability remit? And there wasn't anything, and I was like, now we've got a neurodiversity group at Sky. It's about changing your organisation from the inside, and you changing that and growing your organisation from the inside out. And if you've got a way to support other people, and next year I'm going to be the head of disability for the Ramsey International Film Festival. So I'm going to be promoting disability at all levels for TV and that, and I do other stuff outside of here. And it's about how can we be activists, how can we help people with their mental health right now? Because freelancers are being so misrepresented. The problem in the government, they don't recognise freelance. That they don't recognise that, and I think it's important that we step together, unite together, and continue the fight, the good fight. And it's not one against each other; it's a community, and we are the biggest minority community out there, and we're the least represented in film and TV. I hope that comes across in the best possible way. So I'm honoured to be a panelist in here.
Thank you, Maria. I mean, you had so many important points there, and I agreed with all of them. I think one of the things we can do is put some of these network details, because some of them I haven't heard of. We can put them in the chat, but we can also circulate them to all of the filmmakers. I mean, something that strikes me is, you know, there's Mark still being denied an entry into the industry. And what you show is when you can get a foot on the ladder and when you can get access to these training courses, the sky's the limit. And why?
Absolutely.
Because we've got so many, not like I say, not just very, very creative people, but as all disabled people, we're always having to find different ways of doing things. It actually strengthens our creativity. You know, I can't really stress this enough. You know, what they're turning down are people with additional management experience, additional creativity, additional problem solving skills. You know, you would expect on that basis for disabled people to be really overrepresented in those figures. One thing I wanted to pick up, Maria, which was the sort of well-being, and I think it sort of strikes back to what Paula was saying, the well-being of all crew is important.
Absolutely.
You know, everybody who comes onto a film set could do with that conversation about, you know, things that you might not know, but you need to know. Do they have caring responsibilities? Are they a parent? Do they have a hidden health condition? You know, do you really understand their needs just because you can see their wheelchair? Because one of the things that I find extraordinary about the idea of it's an invisible impairment, and you think, well, only my wheelchair is visible, actually. You know, you don't know anything about my impairments either. You know, you actually do need to ask about them, about access needs. I'm just going to go back to the chat. So we've got Martinson, who's a filmmaker from Ghana, saying it's nice to be joining this conversation. If you'd like to come in on the panel, Martinson, you would be very, very welcome. We showed your film yesterday. Julie is asking, does there need to be an additional role created of a manager for production access who has overall control of both individual access but can also inform the production needs to reflect an accessible set and workplace? I think it depends on the size and the length of the production. But something that's always struck me as somebody who's done the odd bit of supporting actor work is that there's a huge gap in terms of employment for disabled actors, which of course still affects most of us, and many people get experience in front of the camera as part of their work behind. You know, in the days when I used to go out, having not left the house since March 2020, but in the days when I used to go out, there were disabled people everywhere. But if I switch on the TV or a film, there are disabled people nowhere unless they're supposed to be disabled. So I never had a trouble getting things like a taxi sent to pick me up because they'd only employed me because I was disabled. And therefore it was worth paying that little extra bit to get the wheelchair user over. But there's just such an extraordinary gap. And we have an associate drama company, Act Up Newham, who've been creating all of their work and making films on Zoom since last March. All but one are people of colour. All of them speak English as an additional language. Where are the opportunities for them to go and work on set? And yet those sets would, you know, EastEnders doesn't begin to reflect the community in East London, both the very large number of disabled people in East London and the fact that, for example, in this borough, only 16% are white English. So I think there's, you know, we need to remember all of these diversity issues and the sort of additional barriers that are also being faced by some disabled people. So Maria has said there's 104 Films who've been a great supporter of this festival, it has to be said, since the beginning. There's Screen Skills, there's DANK. Now, I don't know, could you just, one of you, tell me what DANK stands for?
I think that's a Disabled Artist Network Collective, and that is what they're doing, if I'm not mistaken. At the end of the year, they're going to have a talent finder. So that is going to be for the disabled actors, writers to be able to be represented. So I would urge anyone in the UK that's not signed up to that or heard of them. They're amazing. They're a sister organisation to deaf and disabled people on TV. And Paula and the rest of Bet2, and I'm a Bet2 member, are amazing. And there's lots of stuff that's going to be done with equality with Bet2. So I'm part of the Equality Commission. I'm part of the Women Committee on Bet2 as well. There's so much things that Bet2 are doing which I can't thank enough. And also what I want to say, Joe, that Channel 4 are now going to leave Ali Castle is really championing for people to get experience on TV. So if you look at Channel 4 are leading the way, and so are the BBC. So there is going to be more and more stuff coming out. So
I have to sort of stop you there, Maria, and say, as somebody who's nearly 60, I've seen Channel 4 and the BBC having these new waves of action for, every 2 or 3 years for the last 30 years. And actually there's almost no progress whatsoever. So I would say those barriers still need busting down.
Oh, absolutely.
Can I just say, Paula, because I think this is a really good time to, as Maria has pointed out, to talk about a bit more about the benefits of becoming a union. Before I do that, there's a number of people down as panelists. If you would like to join in and say something, either switch your cameras on, or if you can't, just let Emily know in the chat and she will get your camera switched on for you. But if you're in a situation where, like Mark, you've studied film, you've really focused on film, you've got your career set in film, but you can't get on the ladder, can you join Bet2? I mean, one of the huge issues in disability discrimination and employment is at recruitment. That's where most of the discrimination takes place, and that's the hardest to prove. So obviously, if you're already a union member, that can be helpful, but I'm not sure it works like that, Paula.
So yes, so you're correct. We represent people that are working in the industry, but we do have a very good incentive for new entrants. So you can go onto our sort of a new entrants tier of membership, which is a little bit cheaper than the standard membership, and that's for people in the first year. So if you have if you've initiated that part, to start your career, that's what you want to do, and you consider that you're in your first year of membership, we welcome you in with open arms. Some of the work that I think we need to develop is reaching out into colleges and universities, not just the prestigious ones, but I myself started out doing a course in South Thames College of Media and Film Production. So I came from quite a normal college, and these are the places we need to get into and highlight the work, the importance of belonging to a union. I think when people ask me this question, and I think how I can describe it as briefly as possible, is that when you join a union, you join a really strong network, a support network. So you can find somebody in that union that will be able to give you information that you want about the industry. You can go to events online, in person, speak to people. You have the resource and the knowledge and experience of officials who are trained in employment law and can tell you when they think you might have a legal case of discrimination. And we are particularly lucky in Bet2 and Prospect that we have an internal legal team which means if you are challenging workplace discrimination, that what happens is that your case is handled by your official that you've built a relationship with, and all the way through to tribunal if it goes there. So that's it. Whereas in other unions, they tend to just hand over to a legal firm. We have a very personal approach to those processes. So really, it's, and also I say that that where we have young people particularly coming into branches, those of us that have been around a little bit longer like to take care that we get them into the industry. So we will tell them the good companies to work for. We will connect them with colleagues that may be looking for for new members of crew, and we find we can have the conversation about that, those individuals about what they might need in terms of support. So when you join a union, you have access to people that will be heading up the departments that you may want to work in, and it's an organization full of free knowledge. Everybody shares their knowledge and experience freely to support each other, and I think that's the feeling that I've always had from belonging to a union, is that if I don't know, I can just get in, I can find somebody that does. And we are currently initiating we've had mentoring schemes for a number of years, but there's a new one particularly in unscripted, and we will develop those across the other branches as well. And I think mentoring is one of the greatest benefits of trade union membership. Sometimes it happens informally. Sometimes you'll find somebody that you really click with and will become an informal mentor. So really, it's people is our strength, and their experiences, which they share willingly and support other members of the union with.
That's great. Thanks, Paula. And Maria is just putting some more stuff into the chat. If you don't know how to find the chat, if you go to, well, I say the Zoom has 2 view buttons, and it's the one that doesn't tell you how to switch between speaker and gallery view. You can go to view live chat. I'd like to bring in Martinson and open this debate up internationally a bit, because we are an international film festival. The feature documentary in yesterday's International Day of Disabled Peoples programme was We Make Film from India, and that was following 4 aspiring filmmakers who were being supported. That film is now finished, but we do have an hour's conversation still up between our chair Julie Newman and the filmmakers Shweta and Priyanka, and that's a sort of long discussion about disability, inclusion and filmmaking. Martinson, what would you like to say? You just need to take your microphone off mute. Okay, keep your system open, and if we hear you, we'll let you know. Because we all know Zoom doesn't always work the way it should work, but we can't hear you at all at the moment, Martinson. Did anybody else want to come in while Martinson's still trying to get a connection?
I'll come in. I have dyslexia, ADHD, dyspraxia. I've had a mental health condition as well. So for me, it's really important, like you said, about looking after people's mental health. Right now with the pandemic, it's been really, really difficult. And right now, although people now can work remotely, so if you've got a disability, you can work remotely and be able to work across the globe. And because disability is international, and I want to make people aware, it took me a long time for me to get where I am, and don't despair. I had to break down a lot of doors, and I had to have tenacity, and it was really tough. But Mark, it's going to happen. I know that. You've got the passion, and anything I can do to help you, I'll leave my contact details. Please reach out, and if I can do to support anyone on here, my door is always open. The company I work for, that I'm going to be working, is a new TV studio that's going to be opening up next year, and I'm now going to be working for the United Nations in a company that is about addressing disability, mental health, because I'm going to be the head of welfare for a global organisation. It's really important, like you say.
Yes, I mean, I think welfare right across the board, and particularly with COVID. And what we're seeing, as Paul has described, is entirely the opposite. Let's cut the brakes down even more. Let's make everything even less planned than it was before. Let's make everything more rushed than it was before. And then what you're looking at is, a pandemic of kind of poor mental health and poor general health. It's not actually going to help the film industry. What we should be doing is responding to the pandemic by addressing all of these issues, because we're here for the long term. Things are not going to get better or easier anytime soon. And that means people's mental health needs to be really robust. Is there anybody else on the panelist, JC, Reese, Shard, Stephanus? If you'd like to come in, we've just got a few minutes left. I think Martinson is still having trouble getting some sound. But I would like to say that the Abilities film from Ghana is available on YouTube, both with sign language and without. And if you just go to the programme page for International Day of Disabled People, you will be able to find Martinson's film there. So we've just got 5 minutes left. If anybody has got more ideas, I'm just flicking back through the chat of things that we could do to keep breaking these barriers down, then please either ask to switch your microphone on or just post it into the chat. It does strike me that one of the things that we need to do is really focus on people like Mark, who are just still being kept outside that door. We've heard about all the different things that we can do once we can break in through that sort of magic circle. But very many people are not in their first year. They're in their nth year of trying since they graduated, or they haven't been able to get in at all. Mark, did you want to add something else?
Just that, so I actually graduated in 2010, I think it was. So I'm actually been trying for quite a long time.
Yeah, and I think that's absolutely typical. Absolutely typical. And it's so wrong. And it's just so wrong on every level. I can't even begin to articulate it properly, but it is wrong. You should not be in those situations. And imagine how much more difficult it is if you're visually impaired, if you're deaf, if you've got learning difficulties. When people say to me, "Oh, you've got special needs," and I go, "No, I need step-free access. It's the 21st century. How special is that?" And actually every piece of kit you trolley in is going to come in on wheels. Some of your cameras are going to be on wheels. Step-free access is just not a special need. But that doesn't mean you can't work with all sorts of multiple conditions if only you were facilitated to do so. So, I mean, I feel all of us have got to be saying, enough is enough. It really is time that this stopped. Martinson, do you want to have one more go and see if we can hear you?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes. Brilliant. Thank you for trying.
Okay, thanks for the opportunity. I'm really excited to be part of this community. It's a really great opportunity for me as well. I mean, coming from a place like Ghana, which is almost hidden on the world map. But anyway, what I would like to add was that actually prior to shooting this film, I had never met any Ghanaian filmmaker who has a disability. The only one who comes close that I've seen with disability is actually a journalist, but not a filmmaker. So I was really encouraged to do this. Initially, the documentary film was supposed to be my story as an entrepreneur, but as I had a conversation with my wife, I realized we needed to tell a bigger story than just myself, because in Ghana, what I've seen is persons with disability are taken advantage of by sometimes NGOs and certain individuals that they come and then they say, oh, we're going to support you. We're going to take videos of you. We're going to document you. And then they take them, use them for content. And these people don't hear from them again. And so when I thought of the film and started going out, interacting with these individuals, the story was the same throughout all of them. And I was actually a bit shocked that this is what was happening. And so they were excited that for the first time, a filmmaker who has disability as himself is now the one who is going to be making the film. And they believe this is going to make a difference. And I'm excited it's making such a difference and how far the film has come as well. Yeah. So to round it up, there are I haven't seen yet, and if there are very few filmmakers who have disability here in Ghana, and even I think across the African continent. And I'm actually really hoping and pushing that this film will go far and encourage others like myself to pick up their creative skill and whatever they have, and then just show forth what is possible. I do animation as well, and initially I thought I was going to do the film in animation, but I knew it wasn't going to have that impact I was looking for. So that's when I decided to do documentary film, and that was an uncharted terrain for me because I was more used to doing animation. So this was my first documentary film that I did, and I'm excited how it turned out to be. Yeah.
Thank you so much for that, Martinson. I mean, it does strike me that we need to have some kind of international network of disabled filmmakers. And as my organisation has probably got the best database of disabled filmmakers, as this is our 10th festival, then possibly not till January, but I think we will be writing to everybody who's contributed, both disabled and non-disabled, to our 10 festivals, and see if we can set something up, whether that's Facebook, which I don't really like, but I can do, or some kind of group that we can just keep connecting and also promoting each other's work. Because, once you've managed to get to make a film, getting it out to festivals is really important. And one of the things we do is liaise with festivals all over the world to bring films in here, but also to take them out. And I think for the very first time, more of our films have been seen at festivals since our 2020 festival than films that we've taken in. So quite a substantial proportion of Superfest's 2021 programme, for example, had films that we'd shown last year. So all of these international exchanges are so important. Like I say, Martinson's film is available on the International Day of Disabled People's page. There's information in there about We Make Film, and you get an opportunity to see that is a great film. But there's also the conversation with Julie and the filmmakers Shweta and Priyanka. And JC says about WhatsApp group, the trouble with that, which we find as an organisation of disabled people, is sharing phone numbers, but it's certainly something to consider. And Julie is saying there's such a crossover in terms of experience and skills. She thinks that's a good idea. So I would just like, again, to thank Film London, Arts Council England, the National Lottery Community Fund, and of course, most of all, Chris from Borough Interpreting and Laura from Global Real-Time Captioning for our access support, Paula for all of her generous time this lunchtime from Beck 2, Mark, Maria and Martinson for their contributions, and everybody who's posted in the chat and who's listened. I don't think, but please let me know, anyone who's said something, I don't think we've said anything that would expose anybody to victimisation or otherwise contravene our Safer Spaces policy. So we will be putting a recording of this up on the website, but if there's anything you've said that you'd like removed, then please let us know. So it's 3 minutes past. Maria's saying fabulous event. Thank you, Maria. It's always a great pleasure. Tomorrow we will be discussing over lunch Zoom filmmaking. Is it a stopgap or is it a new hybrid art form? It's certainly a wonderful way in terms of pre-production of people getting together from all over the world, but we're also going to have a look and say, well, radio is such a form in its own. So there's no reason to be doing Zoom films where everybody's got some excuse to be in the story in front of a computer. but it could be much more interesting than a podcast. You know, are we looking at something where Zoom people make films over Zoom and you bring in animation, you do the soundtrack over Zoom? We don't really know. But that's the subject of discussion tomorrow. I would love to see all of you there. In the meantime, if you haven't finished your lunch, you know, safe journey to the kitchen. Thank you again. And thank you so much for joining us all the way from Ghana, Martinson. We do actually have quite a lot of Ghanese people in Newham. So shout out to them as well. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much, Jo. It was so humble to meet everyone, and take care. Muffin, I love what you do, and Mark, please reach out, and I'll see you deserve so much more.
Yeah. Hope to catch you guys tomorrow.
Definitely. Take care. Paula, take care. And thank you for everything.
Bye, Maria.